This is Roger from priceoftravel.com, and in this video we're going to check the current prices for the cheapest room at 21 of the world's most famous hotels from TVs, movies, and pop culture. We'll go cheapest to most expensive, so the ones at the end are the craziest and the nicest. The cheapest famous hotel is one you've probably seen over and over and over but never actually heard of. The Cherry Tree Inn in Woodstock, Illinois was used for the exteriors of where Bill Murray's character, Phil Connors, stayed in Groundhog Day. The outdoor shots were almost all filmed in the Chicago suburb of Woodstock, and you can book a room here starting at $213 a night, at least on November 1st, which is the date I used to check all of these. The next most expensive is the Fairmont Queen Elizabeth in Montreal, and with 950 rooms, it's the largest hotel in Quebec. But it's more famous for being the first of two hotels on the list that hosted a so-called bed-in for peace by John Lennon and Yoko Ono in 1969. Room 1742 is where they stayed, and on June 1st also recorded Give Peace a Chance, which became John Lennon's first solo single. You can get a room here starting at $281 US, and in a related note, hotels in Quebec are really cheap in November. Our next hotel is especially famous to anyone who has driven Highway 101 between Los Angeles and San Francisco. The Madonna Inn opened just south of San Luis Obispo in 1958 by Alex and Phyllis Madonna with just 12 rooms, and now it's up to 110 rooms, with each one being kookier than the next. The cheapest room is $283 per night, but you'll pay more for the famous Caveman room or some of the other weird suites. We're still in the reasonable prices at this point, and our next entry is the Amsterdam Hilton, which is where John Lennon and Yoko Ono had their other week-long bed-in for peace in March 1969 on their honeymoon in the presidential suite. Their protest obviously worked, and the Vietnam War only lasted 6 more years. Today you can get a room here for $327 per night, which is actually a really good deal in a city where tiny hotel rooms near the train station can cost that much in summer. We're back in the US, and our next entry is the Watergate Hotel, which is obviously famous for the Watergate Gate scandal and break-in during the 1972 presidential election. The burglary actually happened in an office building next to the hotel portion of the complex, but it's still pretty cool that you can stay in this place, and a room will only set you back $353, which isn't bad for this neighborhood in DC. Las Vegas has many of the world's largest and most famous hotels, but none is more famous than Caesar's Palace. Rain Man and The Hangover Part 1 are among the dozens of movies filmed here, and Evel Knievel almost jumped over the fountain in 1967. Today the place has just under 4,000 rooms, and it's nicer than ever. The cheapest room on November 1st will set you back $392, which seems a bit high for a weeknight that time of the year to me. Our next stop is Berlin and the Hotel Adlon, which is famously located at 1 Unter den Linden facing the Brandenburg Gate. It's famous for plenty of reasons, but most people would know it best as the hotel where Michael Jackson thought it would be a fun idea to dangle his infant blanket out the window to satisfy fans standing below. It's now part of the luxurious Kempinski chain, and you can get a room here starting at $451 per night. In one of the few dark moments in this video, our next entry is the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai, which opened in 1903 and has hosted many US presidents and dignitaries, including Barack Obama. It stands next to the Gateway of India, and every tourist will be familiar with it, but it's also infamous as one of the 2 hotels where 10 armed terrorists seized the place for several days in 2008, killing 31 guests and over 100 people elsewhere. That aside, it's a super nice hotel again, and you can book a room here starting at $543 per night. This one is just a bit dark as well, because while the Chateau Marmont on the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood has been a celebrity hangout since it opened in 1929, it's most famous as the hotel where John Belushi partied himself to death in 1982. It's smaller than you might have guessed, with only 63 rooms, suites, cottages, and bungalows, and you can stay here now starting at $586 per night. The Marina Bay Sands in Singapore only opened in 2010, so it's the newest hotel on the list. It's famous for having a 500 feet long elevated swimming pool on its roof, which was also featured a couple times in the movie Crazy Rich Asians. It's got a huge casino in the basement and over 2,500 guest rooms, which start at $634 per night in November. Next up is arguably the most famous hotel in the Caribbean, and probably the largest as well, with over 3,800 rooms. The Atlantis Paradise Island is so large that it's run as 5 separate hotels, with the newest and the cheapest of those being the Reef. The tower with the photogenic breezeway in it is called the Royal, and if you've ever seen a commercial for the place, you're aware of the huge water park in the middle of it all. Rooms at the Reef start at $640 in November, which is still part of the off-season. You'd think for that price it would be all-inclusive, but it's not, and the restaurants and bars are pretty expensive as well. Back in California, our next entry is the Hotel del Coronado, which was the largest resort in the world when it was built in 1888 just across the bay from downtown San Diego. At least 12 US presidents have stayed at the Hotel Del over the years, along with countless movie stars and other celebrities. It famously stood in for a Florida resort in the movie Some Like It Hot, starring Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon in 1959. These days it's run by the fine folks at Hilton, and the cheapest room in November goes for $652 per night. Opening 1 year later than the Del over in London is the Savoy Hotel, which is located on the Strand in the West End. It's been luxurious and expensive since the day it opened, and it has the distinction of being the first hotel in Britain to have electric lights throughout the whole building. I've been there and they still have electric lights, so it wasn't just a fad. Marilyn Monroe, John Wayne, and the Beatles have all stayed here, among countless other famous folks. It was London's most famous hotel even before they used it to film the final scene in Notting Hill, where Hugh Grant's character shows up at a press conference that Julia Roberts is holding. The Savoy is also part of the Fairmont chain these days, and the cheapest room in November starts at $845 per night. Speaking of Julia Roberts, our next entry is the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, which is located where Rodeo Drive meets Wilshire Boulevard in Beverly Hills. It was built in 1928, and it's been the actual home to Elvis Presley, Warren Beatty, and John Lennon over the years, but it's most famous as the primary setting for Pretty Woman starring Julia Roberts. It's currently part of the Four Seasons chain, and the cheapest room in November will set you back $921 per night, including taxes. If you've been to Singapore, you're familiar with the Raffles Hotel, which opened in 1887 and hasn't really updated its exterior look since then. Some will know it as where Nick and Rachel stayed when they arrived in Singapore in the movie Crazy Rich Asians, but long before that it was famous as the place where they invented the Singapore Sling cocktail at their Long Bar in 1915. They've got 230 rooms and suites today, the cheapest of which goes for $1,154 in November. In case you want to pop in to try a Singapore Sling at the Long Bar, that'll set you back about $27 these days. Fellow fans of the White Lotus will be pleased to see the San Domenico Palace Hotel in Taormina, Sicily on the list. That's the only reason it's on this list, and it does look pretty amazing. The cheapest of their 111 rooms goes for $1,241 a night on November 1st, which may seem like a bargain considering they start at over $2,800 in July. The hotel doesn't even have a beach, as the shore there is rocky and the scenes were filmed in a completely different part of Sicily. On the other hand, those rates do include breakfast for two, although you'll have to spring for lunch and dinner there on your own. Considering that the Waldorf Astoria Hotel is currently closed to renovations, the most famous hotel in New York City has got to be the Plaza on 58th Street and 5th Avenue. Famous guests include Frank Lloyd Wright and the Beatles, but many know it best as Kevin McAllister's preferred New York address in Home Alone 2: Lost in New York. It was filmed during the 7-year period when Donald Trump actually owned the place, and he allowed them to film in the lobby in exchange for an awkward cameo appearance in the movie for himself. The cheapest room in November somehow goes for $1,392 per night, which is shocking because some friends of mine stayed there once and their room was really small. For our last stop on the West Coast, we arrive at the Beverly Hills Hotel, which has hosted just about every famous person you can think of since it opened in 1912. The bar here is called the Polo Lounge, and it's also famous partly for the antics of Frank Sinatra and the rest of the Rat Pack. You've probably also seen it on the cover of Hotel California by the Eagles. The cheapest of its 233 rooms goes for $1,486 this November. This next one was even a surprise to me that it cost anywhere near this much. The Park Hyatt Tokyo is famous for being the setting for most of the 2003 Bill Murray film Lost in Translation. The hotel occupies the top 14 floors of the Shinjuku Park Tower, and it's known as one of Tokyo's nicest hotels, but it surprised me that the cheapest room this November starts at $1,640 per night. Tokyo isn't nearly as expensive as it used to be, and you can get nice 4-star hotels in this area for under $300 per night. My fellow White Lotus fans won't be surprised to see this one so far down the list. The Four Seasons Maui at Wailea is best known as the setting of the first season of the HBO show, as it was filmed while the place was closed down for COVID in 2020. Personally, I think I prefer the hotel in Sicily mentioned a bit ago for about a third less. On the other hand, this is Maui, so the $1,873 per night room rate does make sense, and keep in mind that early November is more than a month before high season begins in Hawaii. And finally, the most expensive of our famous hotels is Dubai's Burj al Arab, which opened in 1999. You might have seen it when Roger Federer and Andre Agassi played a stunt exhibition match on the rooftop heliport in 2005. The hotel is built on an artificial island just off the beach, and the unusual design hides the real size of this place, as it's actually 56 stories high, making it the 5th tallest hotel in the world. Weirdly, it's only got 199 total rooms and suites, and the cheapest of those goes for $2,346 per night in November. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this and want to see more like it. This is my first video like this, and I'd love to make more if people find them interesting. And please check out priceoftravel.com for hundreds of articles like this that help people find the best places that fit their budget.